This is my first attempt at baking a loaf of sourdough bread, and my big question is, will it rise or will it fall? I'm quite experienced with baking bread. I've been baking basically the same loaf for a long time in my bread maker. I've tweaked the recipe a few times, but here's a photo that I found from 15 years ago with a loaf, and here's one that I baked this week, and they look pretty similar. So I'm very used to it, but what I understand is that baking with sourdough is quite different, so I'm a little bit uncertain about how well it will go. I have tasted sourdough bread, I really like it, but sometimes it's really dense, it doesn't feel like it's risen properly, so this will be a challenge for me. The other main difference with what I'm doing today is that I'm not going to use my trusty bread maker. I'm going to bake this loaf of sourdough in my wood fire oven. So there's two vital differences here, sourdough and the wood oven. And I've baked in the wood oven before and I've had good success with it, but never with sourdough. So I'm keen to give it a go. Getting the fire up to heat always takes a bit of time, a bit of effort, but it's well worth it to start early and build the fire slowly. Then it was on to mixing my ingredients. I'd weighed the water, the flour and the salt. I added these together and mixed them well. Then I weighed and added the sourdough starter. I began creating this starter just about a week ago, so it's brand new, it's the first time I've ever used it. So once the ingredients are mixed in together, I proceeded to knead it and really stretch it out, really pull it hard, and then also used a slap and fold technique that I frequently use when I'm baking bread. And even when I've been baking in my bread maker the last 8 or so years, I've been mixing and kneading the dough by hand because part of the bread maker went missing and it doesn't mix by itself anymore. And I do enjoy this part of the process, and I'm sure that it makes for a better loaf of bread than if I was using just the bread maker to do it. And I've been baking bread for a lot longer than I've ever owned a bread maker, and bread baking is something that I grew up with. My mother used to bake bread and her father was a baker. He owned his own bakery. And when I was a teenager, I worked in a small supermarket in New Zealand that happened to be the very first supermarket in the country that had a bakery. I've been there for a few years, and then they opened the bakery, and we used to love going in to assist the baker. Particularly on a Saturday morning, there would be lines of people waiting for hot, fresh bread. So the baker, he was an Englishman named Clive. He was a real character, and man, he knew his stuff. He was really good, and so fascinating to watch, and I learned a lot there. Although it would be a number of more years before I started baking my own bread, but it was just building towards that point. And baking bread is something that I have enjoyed ever since I first started, and now I've got the wood oven. It's just taken on a new twist, a new turn if you like, and I am just really enjoying beginning to experiment more with it. And part of that is starting to experiment with the sourdough as well. Once I've got the ball of dough feeling good, it's time to just pop it in the bowl, put some flour on it and put some cling wrap over it and leave it for a couple of hours. I've been watching a number of videos online, and I really like watching a guy called Patrick Ryan. He's an Irish baker, and he was saying to leave the dough for this first proofing for 3 hours, but here in Thailand the temperature, the humidity is quite a bit different than it is in Ireland, I'm sure. So I decided just to check back on it every now and again, and so after about 2 hours I pulled it out and knocked it back and folded it and put it back to proof again. Unfortunately, I had some tech problems with my camera and it didn't record that part of the process. And then I had further problems that delayed my baking, and so when I got back to the dough, it had become really sticky. I'd followed Patrick's suggestion to put it in a Pyrex dish with a lid using a tea towel, a well-floured tea towel, and when I opened this up it was just a sticky mess. It had risen really well, but it was just stuck to the tea towel and the whole thing collapsed, so it was overproofed. And from what I understand so far, there's no real way to bring a dough back after it's overproofed, because apparently the yeast is spent and it just won't work anymore. But I pressed on and managed to get as much of it off the tea towel as I could, and just worked with it again and put it back in the bowl, and then it was time to cook. My oven temperature was good, so I popped it in the oven and then made sure to come back frequently to check it. And it looked like it was rising a little bit by little bit, but I was pretty sure it wasn't ever really going to rise properly. So I checked it carefully and pulled it out when I thought it was ready, and then left it to cool overnight. So this is not the loaf I was hoping for. It's rather flat. It didn't rise. Well, it did rise, but it overproofed and then collapsed. Let's have a look inside it. It's feeling quite dense, which is what I expected. It's pretty tough, but it is a sourdough loaf and they are quite often a bit more dense. Not too bad. I think that's still edible. I did end up eating that whole loaf and it was pretty good. It was dense, but I toasted one side of it, put a swipe of nice homemade tomato chutney on it, and it wasn't too bad at all. And I'm not defeated. I'm going to try again. I want to make a really good loaf of sourdough bread, so I have actually started doing that now. I'm going to make a series of shorts about it, so keep a watch for those. And at the same time I made that first sourdough loaf, I also made my very first gluten-free pizza base. We did make a video of that and you can watch that here.